I am ready to.
Isn't it? I've known one other person to do that too.
It's only contain my well house and any other filtration. Sorry, I'm ready.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the West Haven Planning Commission meeting. Tonight is November 12th, 2025. Time is 6:03. And tonight we're going to start our meeting with opening ceremonies with Commission Member Smith and with the Pledge of Allegiance from Commission Member Smith, prayer moment of silence from Commission Member Lamar. I also want to acknowledge the Vice Chair, Andrew Reyna is online, as well as Commission Member Stimson. So, and Amy Hughey, our lawyer, is also online. Sorry, Amy.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in prayer. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to represent our city, and we recognize the responsibilities placed upon us. Please give us the wisdom and knowledge and insight we need to carry out our responsibilities in accordance with the law and ordinances of both the state and the city, and look out for the best welfare of the entirety of West Haven when we do that. Amen.
Okay, action on minutes. Does anybody have anything with our minutes? Okay, if not, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Did you hear Andrew?
No, sorry, I didn't get my eye in on time. I couldn't find the mute button.
All right, thank you.
Aye.
Yeah, thank you. The motion carries. All right, reports, actions taken by the city council on the planning commission. Stephen?
Yeah, so I just have a couple items. There wasn't anything that the council heard at the last meeting from the planning commission. However, there was an interesting conversation during their work session that I felt like I should inform the commission of, because we'll be bringing something to you based off of it. But a couple months ago, we had a property owner that lives on owns some industrial property on 1900 that came into staff that wants to build some individual storage units, and they did not meet the standards within our code. Essentially, what our code states is off our major corridors, you can only have storage units if they're 800 feet back from the center line of the roadway. And so his property that he was interested in is about 250 or 300 feet back from the center line of the roadway, and only about 300 feet deep. So or 200 feet deep. So there was nothing within his property you could actually do the storage units on. So after we had that conversation, he went to the city council during their public forum and expressed desire for the council to make modifications to that code. After that public forum, I had a couple council members email me about it. So I sent them out a little bit more detailed summary. And then it was brought up in the council reports last week. And the council discussed it and gave staff direction to come up with a proposal to make some changes to those standards. And by this, it would be a land use regulation. And so we would have, so it would have to go through the planning commission prior to the council being able to take any action on it. And so the council directed staff to work with the planning commission to come up with, or to see if there was any proposed changes that we would recommend. And so we'll likely be bringing that to the planning commission in the next month or two.
Okay. Thank you,
And-
Steve. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. We also, just so you know, we also have a few other ordinances that we've kind of been working on that we'll bring forward in the next couple of months, including one on moderate income housing, as we discussed a month ago. And then we're also looking at updating our home occupation and business licensing standards. And we're also taking a look at some of our land use tables and kind of reviewing those as well. So there, we have a few things that are kind of coming forward. But so next couple of months, we'll probably have a few proposals for the planning commission to consider.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephen. All right, discussion and action to consider an amendment to the West Haven Walmart subplat located approximately 4101 South Midland Drive parcel, approximately 6.1 acres. Applicant Spencer Hymas, is that correct, sir? Thank you. Galloway and Company LLC. Okay, Stephen, do you?
Damien will actually handle this one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is a request to amend the subdivision plat for the West Haven Walmart subdivision. It is a 6-lot plat, all lots zone C3 on South Midland Drive. The lots that would be affected by the proposed amendment are lots 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, so nearly all lots in the subdivision. Although they would be minor changes to each lot, it's essentially a reallocation of some of the area to make those lots that are fronting Midland Drive more ideal for development. And all of the proposed lots do meet the development standards of the zoning code to include minimum lot width and minimum area. And also setbacks will be met, the setbacks requirements. Of course, there's nothing there currently, but for the entitled projects, which is the Walmart Supercenter and also the Walmart Fuel Center, will not be affected by the proposed amendment. There are still a couple of corrections that staff has, 3 to be exact, 2 of which would be required in order for the proposal to meet state requirements. A written description of the proposed changes would need to be obtained. Also, some owner consent forms that are signed, notarized, would need to be obtained. But these are relatively expedient fixes, and for that reason, staff recommends that the commission does not withhold their approval. Engineering, fire, building have also all reviewed the proposed amendment and have approved of it. Staff does recommend one condition of approval, that all comments provided by the staff in the attached corrections report are satisfactorily addressed before the drafting and the signing of the Mylar, which is the final recordable plat. So with that condition of approval, staff does recommend the approval of the proposed plat amendment.
Okay. Mr. Hymas, do you have anything you'd like to add? No? You're
questions?
okay. Way good. Anybody have any questions about this? Okay. Anybody online either? Probably not. All right.
Nothing for me.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the second, whoops. Yeah, I make a motion to approve the second amendment of the West Haven Walmart subdivision plat, subject to the following conditions. All comments provided by staff on the attached corrections report are addressed prior to the drafting of the Mylar for signatures.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. We got that one taken care of. All right. Now I'm going to guess this is Stephen.
Yes,
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
give us a,
The presentation on public hearing, presentation on the water use and preservation element for the general plan.
Thank you. So I'll give us a quick introduction of where we're at, and then I'll turn the time over to Aubrey Larson, who is been our consultant on the project with Landmark Design. So we looked at this a couple weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into a lot of the legal background, but maybe just to summarize that back in 2022, the Utah Senate Bill 110 was passed, and then some modifications later in the next year that required most cities to integrate a water use element or water use and preservation element into their general plan. And the water use and preservation element plans are required to address several aspects, and I have those listed out within my report. But generally speaking, we're supposed to plan for current and future water use and take steps in order to conserve water within the city. And one thing I wanted to note that the Utah code numbering has changed. And so if you look it up under the old code numbering, you won't find it. And so actually that's one thing that we will change in our current draft is update those code references because that was changed last week. And so between our last week or the last meeting and today, we have made several changes to the document. And Aubrey will plan on reviewing the full document, so I don't want to steal too much of her thunder. But I do mostly want to point out the biggest changes that were made happened really in the last, really starting on page 16 through the end of the document, including, and that's mostly what strategies and elements of the city will be looking at and implementing. Most of the changes were really to clarify what our role is and what the most productive steps that we can take in order to help preserve the water or preserve water within the city. And then also, I know Aubrey will mention this, one of the other things that we did add is we added a water use and preservation element checklist on page 29, which really goes through our compliance with state code. And so to ensure that the document meets all the standards set out within the state requirements. And so without any, I guess, oh, and one last thing I wanted to mention is we did advertise this public hearing, and the general plan public hearing needs to be advertised slightly differently. So one of the big things we had to do was send notices to all affected entities. So not only did we publish it on the Utah Public Notice website and our website and post it here at City Hall, but we also sent letters to every water district within the city, including Roy, which is the water supplier for West Haven Service District. We also sent a letter to Weber Basin, and then every municipality that is adjacent to the city and to the county as well. And in addition to that, we also advertised the notice within the printed newsletter that went out for November. And so we did a couple of things that we didn't have to print in the newsletter. That's something we did extra. But the other things are still required by law, but are additional beyond what we normally do for public hearings, just because of the general plan aspect of this. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Aubrey to give us a presentation and kind of review the document as a whole. Hey, Robin, do you need to open up the presentation first?
Okay. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So as Stephen said, my name is Aubrey Larson. I work for Landmark Design, and we've been contracted to do some planning work for West Haven, and the water element is one of the first big projects that we've been working on together. My goal this evening is to give you some background, foundational information that's useful to understand the context of the water element and how it will function as a part of your general plan. And then I'll do a quick walkthrough of the draft element itself. And then if there's any comments or questions, we can have some time for that. Okay, and hopefully this mouse works. Where should I click?
You might have to scroll.
Oh, scroll. Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so project background, I think Stephen already covered most of these points, but I did want to take a step even further back and look at the role of the general plan, since this will essentially function as a new chapter. And I know West Haven's kind of looking at the different general plan elements separately, but this document will serve as an advisory guide to land use decisions. It's meant to describe where you are, where you want to be, and how you will get there. It does not create regulations or requirements, but you'll notice in the back of the document there are some recommended goals and strategies. Again, these are now the 4 required elements for a general plan. Land use. Our team is actually working on the land use element right now. We're kind of going through the existing conditions. It's been very helpful to look at land use and water use together. Also housing and transportation, and then new requirement is water use and preservation. Stephen already covered this, so most cities and all counties are required to amend their general plans to address that intersection between land use and water. The deadline is December 2025, so the end of this year. I think Stephen also hit most of the requirements, and again, we'll update the code number. I noticed it changed too. I'm like, where is this gone? I think it's helpful to boil it down to about these 4 main requirements. So looking at the effect of permitted development and development patterns on water demand and infrastructure, ways to reduce water demand and per capita water use for both existing and future development, and then taking a hard look at the city's operations and finding ways to eliminate practices or conditions that waste water. I also wanted to highlight this other requirement because I think it was pretty important for West Haven's water element. We were asked to consult with public water system or systems serving the municipality with drinking water regarding the implementation of this new element and then how it will affect both water supply planning and water distribution planning. So Appendix A, I hope you've had some time to look at. That's a summary of some of the key takeaways from those conversations we had with the public water systems, which I'll talk a little bit more about them in a second. Okay, I'm going to jump into an overview of the document and the content and some of the thinking behind the structure. So the first section is the introduction. This is where we establish the water element requirements, set the stage, and talk a little bit about water system consultation, what we found, talking to those system managers. So as you're well aware, West Haven is not a water provider. In fact, there are 4 culinary systems serving the city, listed here: Buena Vista, Taylor West Weber, Hooper Water Improvement District, and then, of course, West Haven Special Service District. And this map is meant to show generally where the service boundaries are located. I know the colors are probably a little distorted. Buena Vista is yellow, Taylor West is orange, Hooper is kind of a green turquoise, and then this tan color is West Haven Special Service District as the smallest. So some of the key themes that stood out from those conversations we had with the water managers, all of them talked about growth and growth pressure, and how that has an impact on the water supply and what are some of the hard realities that we're being forced to grapple with. Talked about water planning and the administrative process. I know that was a major goal for this element, was to really figure out roles for the water systems in the city and who does what and when. And we talked about water rights and some of the constraints there, opportunities for strengthening local conservation, and how education and awareness can play a critical role in that. The next section of the water element provides a little bit of water planning context specifically for West Haven. We talk about the Weber River watershed, the context of the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District within that, regional water conservation goals, and then there's an overview of how does water get delivered to homes and businesses. So this map on the right represents the 5 major river basins that do eventually drain into the Great Salt Lake. You happen to be part of the Weber River Basin. This watershed supplies about 21% of the state's drinking and agricultural water. There are also regional goals associated with these different watersheds. And for the Weber River Basin, there's a a baseline established, I think, in 2015, so it's a little old. And so from that baseline, the goal is to reduce 20% by 2030, 26% by 2040, and then 30% by, I believe, 2065. My understanding is these goals are being updated since it's based on an older study, but I think that those percentages do give you a baseline and something to aim for, especially from a regional perspective. Some key differences between culinary and secondary water. Culinary water, this is treated drinking water, primarily used for indoor use, but sometimes secondary water is not available, so culinary water will be used for landscaping in some parts of the city. Secondary water generally is untreated, used for outdoor irrigation. There is a new state requirement requiring metering for all pressurized connections by January 1st, 2030. There are numerous benefits to metering. It reduces waste, it helps with leak detection, and it also supports more informed water use. If you know how much water you're using, you generally can make more informed decisions. Secondary water suppliers are Weaver Basin and Roy Water Conservancy districts, and there are a handful of smaller canal companies. The focus of the water element is on culinary, since that was the state requirement, but it's important to acknowledge that secondary water and those providers are an important part of the overall system. And then there are data gaps. So, for example, with the secondary system, metering hasn't been required, and now you're going to have metering data available, which will be very useful moving forward. The next part of the document gives kind of a high-level overview of the effect of development on water demand and infrastructure. The main idea here is that different land uses drive different water demand. So for example, agriculture, the pattern we're seeing is that there's a decline in agricultural use, and when those previous agricultural lands are developed, it generally shifts the use to municipal systems. So that's something to recognize. Residential uses are the largest share of municipal and industrial demand. Variations such as lot size, housing types, all have an impact on outdoor water use. Of that water use, about 50 to 70% is used for outdoor irrigation. And reducing irrigated areas is definitely one of the most effective conservation strategies. Institutional uses, this is a very small share of total water demand, but it's very visible. It gives the city an opportunity to lead by example, show some really well thought out waterwise landscaping, demonstration gardens, identify properties owned by the city that you could convert to more waterwise landscaping. So really showing that leadership. Commercial and mixed use. Again, like residential, it just varies by scale. Mixed use can improve efficiency and reduce infrastructure needs. There's also opportunities to incorporate waterwise design and stormwater reuse. And then industrial, depending on the industry, can have different water consumption. The next section is system profiles for these 4 different water providers. I just threw a sample up there. I know you probably can't read it. But each of these profiles summarizes the provider service area, sources, infrastructure, as well as their conservation goals. Those came from water conservation plans that they were required to provide. It's important to recognize that the data presented reflects district-wide information, since city-specific data is generally unavailable. And again, this goes back to having a regional perspective and understanding that water flows past boundaries. I think this was a great question that I believe came up last time. Why were the goals so different between the different water providers? The reason is there is not a national standard for measuring and reporting water use. Gallons per capita per day is common, but it can be calculated in a variety of different ways, which is challenging to make meaningful comparisons between providers, cities, whatever it may be. And there is this graphic from Department of Water Resources that kind of shows just some different variables that can change how it is calculated. The next section, shaping West Haven's water future. This was organized around Basically, these three big ideas of what should shape that water future. So residents and their perspectives, what they want, what they need, proven policies and practices, and then how can West Haven be a water steward? Appendix B had some results from a survey that you can look at. These are just kind of some high-level takeaways from residents. 76% are concerned about water use and preservation. A lot of them want to see action and for West Haven to be a leader. Values that were expressed are sustainability, making sure there's water for future generations through a reliable future water supply. What was interesting is we saw a high willingness to change private landscapes. About 76% of the survey respondents said they would change between 40 to 100% of their landscaping to something more water-wise, which is significant. Program preferences. So the state provides a number of programs through Utah Water Savers. We noticed that residents are using the Smart Controller program, turf conversion. They're interested in having help for creating water-wise designs, and that turf conversion interest is rising fast. And this infographic represents Utah Water Savers program participation by West Haven residents. Just note that the years are a little bit different. These programs didn't all start at the same time, so the numbers are going to be a little skewed that way, but you can see that the Smart Controller Rebate Program has been most popular with about 270 participants since 2018. So the proven policies and practices in this section, these are things that you can build on top of for the city's goals. So first off, increasing indoor efficiency, upgrading fixtures and technologies to things that are more cost-effective and more efficient. Outdoor water reduction is a huge focus. Landscape irrigation accounts for over 60% of residential water use, so targeting outdoor water efficiency is a strategy that many cities are pursuing and finding ways to incentivize that and support residents. This graphic is just meant to show water demand based on some typical West Haven lot sizes. So we've got one from the R1 zone, R2, and then patio zone. And the droplets are meant to represent relative water demand. So based on size alone, there's differences. And then there's also different landscape types. So this top row is meant to represent a high demand water landscape with the corresponding droplets, something that's been landscaped using the Localscapes approach. Hopefully you're familiar with that program. And then a very low demand landscape, so you can kind of see those differences. And then, of course, water smart development patterns. So smaller lots, clustering development, infill, these kinds of things can help conserve water. Okay, so water stewardship. So you'll notice these are the three main goals found at the end of the document. These build on those conservation strategies and are really, trying to get at some of the issues we discovered when we talked to the culinary providers, that there's coordination is lacking. People are not sure, what's the process? Where does their water come from? So these are some goals that are trying to move the needle. So the first is clarifying administrative responsibilities with water providers to ensure a coordinated effort towards conservation. The second, advancing shared water conservation goals. This is between water providers, developers, and residents, and then making sure that your local policies and standards support sustainable growth.
You would accept that person in with your
I
brother?
sure can. I think this is the last section, so just looking forward and then the goals. Here is where we try and, show population projections and then estimate culinary water demand, just to give you an idea of your trajectory, and then goals and strategies. Okay, so I think the main point here is West Haven is growing, and with that growth will come additional water demand. We were able to get, an estimate for the number of current units in the city, as well as future units. And since indoor water doesn't vary quite as much as outdoor, we use the state standard of 0.45 acre feet per unit. And that's how this graph on the right was created. So this is showing your trajectory based on current and future units, and then showing, what would a 20% reduction look like in that trajectory. Okay, and then there's just the goals at the end with implementation strategies. I'm not going to go through all of these unless there's any specifically would like to talk about, but there are a number of strategies here. Thank you. So if there's any comments or questions.
Anybody have any questions? Comments?
There will also be additional time to have if there's any questions that come up during the discussion too. So.
All right, thank you.
I have lots of questions. Do you want to hold those until we do the discussion
I think yes, unless there's any questions that might help in for the public for the context of the public hearing.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to enter public hearing to receive public input for the water use and preservation element for the general plan.
I'll make a motion to enter public hearing to receive public input for the water use and preservation element for the general plan.
I second that motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, we're now in public hearing. Is there anybody that would like to speak during the public hearing? Anybody online, Robin, that has a hand up? No? Okay. You have to come up, I'm sorry. Before you do that, I have to read this to you. Not just to you, but in general. Rules governing public hearings. Each speaker will be limited to a single opportunity to speak and shall direct comments only to the commission. Such opportunity may not exceed 2 minutes as has been determined by the chair as outlined in Resolution 28-2021. In accordance with Resolution 28-2021, the chair may refuse to recognize or may exclude from the public hearing anyone who is disorderly, abusive, or disruptive, takes part in or encourages audience demonstrations such as applause, cheering, display of signs, or other conduct disruptive to the hearing, comments without first receiving recognition from the chair and stating his or her full name and residence, or presents irrelevant, immaterial, or repetitious evidence. Comments and questions raised by speakers will not be addressed or answered by staff or commissioners during the hearing, but will be addressed upon conclusion and closure of the hearing. But you don't look like you're going to be disruptive or have signs or any of that stuff. So come on up and state your name and your address for us.
Hi, Judith Sharp, 3621 West, 4375 South, West Haven.
Okay.
I mostly just had questions about our Great Salt Lake and how our impact will have on the lake, and what's our role with the city as far as what percentages we're contributing to the demise of our lake, and just how can the city, what role do we have in that, and how can we as consumers, residents of water use, I know there's some programs, I have an acre down the street, and my biggest watershed is going right to my trees, but hoping that will slow down in a few years once they're established. So I'm watching my metered secondary water go pretty high, but I'm usually below that. But I try to take measures with, landscaping and such and all the other things that were presented. But so really, it's just a question of guidance on, what we're doing and how you can direct us and keep us informed. I think we have a beautiful jewel of a state park that, it has revenue, right? I think we get revenue from the brine shrimp, and it's an industry here. And, what does that play a part in the state taking effort? And also, I wanted to ask, about the water. Is there something coming from Davis County that's feeding into, I know that's outside our jurisdiction, but maybe the information about, is there secondary water or treated water going into the Great Salt Lake? So that's my main concern, is about, not only our city role and what that plays on specifically the long-term future, but of the lake, because now we're seeing really real evidence. Oh, and the other thought I had too was, I thought agricultural was like much higher, like 87% of our water usage statewide was ag, and then the percentage of that was very high in grains for livestock, which I've had horses for many years here, but so I was concerned, like, what are we doing with our growth and the shifts in there, and what, where is our water majority going to? So that's it.
Okay,
Thank you. I'll just
thank you.
listen or
Well-
direct me to, websites or guidance or publications or something like that too. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I think I can answer
Try and
her
tackle any of that.
questions, but maybe let's see if there's any other public comment. And then once we close the
Okay.
public hearing, I can answer them.
Okay. Do we have any other comments? Nothing else online? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
I motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a tie for second. One, Robin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are out of public hearing. Okay. Believe Commissioner Lamar had questions.
Yeah. Did you want me to answer those
You can,
questions
yeah,
first?
go ahead and try and answer them so that they can get out of here if they want to.
Yeah. So by state law, we're actually required the part of the plan is supposed to require to address concerns with the Great Salt Lake and making sure water returns to it. And so within the plan itself, one of the biggest things that we can do as a city is our outdoor water use. Because typically indoor water use, once it's treated, it will return back to the natural system. So a lot of that is just discharged back into the Weaver River, which then flows into the Great Salt Lake. So the greatest loss of water is for outdoor irrigation. And so the biggest thing that we do within our plan itself is up to regards to the Great Salt Lake, is to make some recommendations on how to have more water-wise landscaping outside and to make that a requirement within the city. The city already has some pretty substantial requirements, even though it's most commercial and institutional developments that are being built mostly have rock and more natural scape type of water or landscaping, and that's to help address some of that. And so that's how, by our code, we don't really monitor, since we're not a water provider, we don't have a lot of that data of how much water is coming in and how much water is going out. But by talking to the district and our treatment center, that's the best way to help monitor and protect the Great Salt Lake. For that, West Haven can do is by making our outdoor irrigation more efficient. And then you had a question about secondary water that's going to Davis County. I'm not sure. I know much about that. I do.
I've lined in the last couple of years, and I know I've seen the water level rise significantly. Visibly, you can see that.
Yeah.
I haven't stayed up on it. Some of the reports I kind of got lost in, and I just felt like they weren't moving anywhere, so I kind of have not been moved. I have noticed just being up there a few weeks ago how high it was, and so I wasn't sure that was in part two, or a more large percentage of it because of that program they had. Something to do with the Davis County water that's treated water. That's very different than going through the aquifer from our mountains, and even our culinary water. And I'm not sure how much it really affects that water going in. So we're interrupting that whole process.
Yeah. I'm not sure much about what that program is. I know Weber Basin has been working on a couple pipelines, which is our local water provider to that. Yeah, it could be. I know they have a plan or there is on their long range plans about getting some water from the Bear River Basin and coming up north, but I don't know the details of it. I just know there is a plan, but I don't think that's yet been implemented by any means. So, but that is.
I was concerned because that's my question is about how we're impacting our future, especially going to.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if we had any, participation in that or.
Yep, no problem.
I believe you had a lot of questions, Commissioner.
I do. My overarching comment is, as we've heard and read in the document and heard tonight, that the data that we're basing presumably data-driven decisions on isn't very good data. And in fact, a lot of cases it doesn't even exist. And to compound that problem, we've got 4 different agencies that use 4 different data methods to determine our GPCD. So gallons per customer day. So that really puts a further wrench and imposes difficulty on interpreting that data. Comparing data between our 4 water providers, between the 4 water providers. But yet, there's nothing in our documentation or our document that says this needs to be addressed. And in fact, I'll take it one step further. It actually talks about the need for a regional approach to our water usage. And then you look back further and deeper in the appendix that all the water providers say, yeah, but we don't want a regional approach and we don't want regional oversight. We're going to act independently. So I think we kind of have an impossible task here. So what I would suggest is that somewhere in this document or in our general plan, that one of the strategies needs to be that we bring those 4 water providers together using a common data gathering and analysis and calculating system so that we can in fact compare data between those 4 users so that we can use the data to determine whether we're making progress or not. Because the way it currently sets, we could have one water provider saying we're only saving 10%, but calculated by another water provider's method, we could be saving 20%. So unless they're all on the same page, we really don't know how we're doing. So I think that needs to be the first thing that we need to address. And we need to address it with our water providers, and we need to show commitment in our general plan that we're going to do that and work with the water providers to generate a commonality among the 4 of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask a
does.
couple clarifying questions? So one of our implementation goals, because I recognize that fact, and I actually think in compiling this, that's been one of our largest challenges is that coordination with the different water providers. And we recognize that, some of the data, like most of them didn't even have data specifically for West Haven. They had district-wide data or where, maybe not very usable data that they could provide to help us with this process. And so that's actually, if I could summarize kind of our implementation, it's really how we provide better coordination with the districts, and then how do we advance shared goals once that coordination is better, and then our own internal policies with our water, with our landscape ordinance and what the city does, as that's an example. And so I guess I'm thinking with maybe it's something that we can tweak a little bit, but in implementation 1.4, it reads, implement a formal data sharing process using quarterly reports, shared GIS layers, or project summaries to track growth in water use. Are you thinking maybe we could potentially edit that or maybe add another guidance that kind of echoes that, but maybe more of a regional, try to facilitate more regional coordination and how their water policies and goals impacts West Haven? Something kind of more like in those lines? Is that what you're looking for, or?
Yeah, because every city that's part, I know their water providers serve multiple cities. every city that's a part of that is that water provider's area of providing water. Every city has that same problem
Yes.
that we're seeing. And so there's a vested interest because of the overlap that they do it similarly so that they're all on the same page, and we as a city, and Roy as a city, and Hooper as a city, and all these other entities that use these 4 water providers, are making data-driven decisions. And I think that's going to be important as we go down this path to whether or not our water conservation measures in our general plan are actually working or not.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Because we're not gonna, we're gonna be using that data to decide where we need to go, as you pointed out in your presentation. So, I would submit we don't even know where we're at. And we're making a plan to where we're gonna go. And I think we need to get those 4 water providers on the same page. And I think we need to take the lead, and I think we need to put it in the documentation. So, whether we put it in the general plan, that's great, as you suggested in 1.4. But I'm adamant that it needs to be done. Otherwise, we're just pretending we're making progress, and we don't have anything to evaluate whether or not we're successful. So that would be my first comment. More than just sharing data, but work with the 4 providers to get on a common data capture, analysis, and calculation program. I think that needs to be in 1.4. That's a good place for it.
Okay.
And okay, so moving on, page 7, it talks about the Bear River project and what's holding it up. Larger projects such as Bear River project face challenges from climate impacts and ongoing negotiations. I understand the ongoing negotiations part, but the climate impacts, the Bear River project, or experiencing, imagine every other reservoir, every other watershed is, experiencing those same climate impacts, and we're always, no matter what, that's a reality. So I'm not sure that climate impacts really hinders the implementation of the Bear River project.
Maybe you can correct me, but I'm pretty sure that's referring, I think there's a lot of pushback because the Bear River is the largest contributor to the Great Salt Lake. And so there's concern about diverting more water from that its impact on the Salt Lake itself. I think that's the main climate impact that's being referred to. Is that correct? Okay.
So maybe that could be clarified in there, because I could read that and look at that and assume that's global warming or whatever. What be a little more definitive about what that climate impact might be. But the reality is all of our water sources are greatly affected by climate impact. Page 11, commercial and mixed use, where it talks about commercial and mixed use and kind of puts in a plug for doing commercial and mixed use. So this is a water usage document, and it talks to creating more vibrant, walkable neighborhoods. And I'm not sure. I think there are people in our city that have seen mixed use and the implementation of mixed use that would take exception to that phrase. I'm not sure it's really relevant to a water use document to be talking about walkable, vibrant neighborhoods.
But would that be maybe how they look, by having landscape, the plants and stuff like that? Would that be what they might be talking about, so that you need water for plants as you go through thing, with that, instead of just rocks everywhere? It might be having some of the plants and that type of landscaping materials. I would much rather be walking down a path that looks like has some plants and stuff versus just rocks and asphalt.
So so the reason why, and you can jump in anytime. Um, so one of the reasons why we included this in the plan is the state recently released a report that talked about land use and water efficiency. And they found that as, uses were combined in moderate levels. We're not talking about like downtown Salt Lake by any means, but like on neighborhood levels of mixed use and the study actually even found on a per unit basis, as you increase the density up to about 8 units an acre, you found that those areas tended to be more water efficient on a per unit basis. I mean, typically you're seeing not as many people in those homes, so there could be an argument where on a per capita use, it might be a little bit different. And so I think that's what this paragraph is getting at, is that as we're exploring water conservation and water issues, we should consider uses that may be more water efficient and may concentrate water uses, because not only does that tend to lower the overall water use on a per unit basis, but it also helps with infrastructure issues as well, because you can concentrate where that infrastructure is. And so it ends up being a more efficient option for water delivery as well. Was there any other, did I miss anything?
No, I think your point is it's kind of a subjective comment on the value of mixed use, and it's not objective. So taking out some of that language, I think it's in there just trying to show the benefits and tying it back to the land use element, but that may be a more appropriate place to talk about walkable, vibrant communities than the water element. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, because I think, to me, having experienced the negative impact of mixed use in West Haven City previously, and I think our new ordinance is much better, but it reads like it's a advertisement for mixed use kinds of things. And so I think it doesn't really belong in a water use document. It belongs in a land use document, perhaps. And I know we're trying to mesh those two. And so I understand that, but the focus of this thing, I think, should be on water use.
I think some of the language that you just used describing that probably comes out better than saying just mixed use.
Yeah. Okay.
Concentrating and I can't take notes that fast, but I think you get the gist of it.
And if you read further through that, it says can further reduce water and energy demand. So again, that's a great thing to reduce energy demand, but this is a water use document with how do we integrate that with land use? So, is that energy demand thing in there? And the other comment I'll have about is I'm reading through this and the subjective nature of this. There's a lot of things that talks about this very thing, mixed use and the benefits and other things. And there's no source documents that I could go back to and say, oh, let me see the data on that, And I apologize, I'm an engineer and I'm a fiscally conservative engineer. My wife wanted to buy a new car and she was on the lot and the salesman walked up to her and says, oh, what, blah, 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 what does your husband do for a living? And she says, well, he's an engineer. Seligman says, oh, engineers don't like to spend money, and walked away. You know, you're probably an engineer too, maybe environmental, no, okay. But at any rate, you know, I'm looking for what are the source data for these statements that are made about, you know, how the planning benefits it. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of those, and I'd like to see, you know, bibliography. And I know that's a lot to ask, but I just, you know, trust but verify, have that mentality. So, any rate, so that's my comment on commercial and mixed use. I think subjective things that don't apply directly to mixed use or water conservation more appropriately belong in other areas. Okay, again, down in culinary water system profiles, page 11, data presented reflects district-wide information as city-specific data is generally unavailable. You know, just underscored what we've been talking about, and I think we really got to have that. We got to, excuse me, we've got to figure out a way to do that, and we've got to get that data. If we're serious about it, if we're just going to fill the square with the state by putting it in our general plan, then it doesn't really matter. But if we're serious about it, we've got to get the data. I already talked about the difference in that. Page 12, I mentioned this last time we looked at the draft. When it talks about the 4 different districts and gives us a little snapshot of what each district does and where they provide the water, it does say they're serving an estimated population of 35, for instance, Bonta Vista, 35,570, and it lists the communities it serves. I guess that's okay, but one could, if they didn't read that carefully, they could get the impression that's 35,000 residents in West Haven. So anyway, I think that we need to underscore that not all of those serve all the population in West Haven. Oh, and I'll ask this, so we go to table 4, page 15. West Haven Special Service District, it says most connections are metered. We don't meter all of our connections.
I believe that is accurate. I think I would have to talk to the district provider, or I'd have to talk to the district itself, but I think that's what they said in our interview with them.
They're still working on it.
Yeah, I think
So
it's a
that-
work in
that's
progress,
our-
right? Yeah.
That's our district. We own that. We own all the metering that system. That's the one system that we have ultimate control over how it operates and the data that we get from that.
Okay.
And so we should be that one should be down pat. Okay, now here's my engineering background again, page 16. So I looked at this data and there's only 55 respondents in that figure 2 survey. And I don't know how many people that survey went out to, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but there's only 55 respondents. And so I go do some thing and in here some calculating, and I see, well, there's roughly 24,000 residents in the city. 55 people responded. Some math, and I said, well, in order for it to really be statistically valid, the number of respondents we need is 381, not 55. So we're presenting data in this report that's not even valid.
So I
And
want
we're
to,
76% of folks this and 43% that, and I don't, I don't see the benefit of, and in fact, it's even, I'll go further, I'll say it's misleading because it's not statistically
yeah.
valid to include that data here.
Yes, so you are correct. We only had 55 respondents who responded to the survey. We sent it out in the newsletter. We had a booth at West Haven Days. We did some efforts to gather more data. So I think you bring up a good point that yes, this is not statistically valid data. However, I don't think it is. Still think it has some importance, though we shouldn't treat it as gospel per se.
I don't know how we can, pardon me. I think at a minimum, in fact, I was going to suggest that back in the appendix where there's that data there, that we put, I made some notes on that. Appendix B, I think it needs a description of the survey, you know, kind of an introduction of that survey. Description of the survey, what we did, how we gathered the data, how many surveys were sent out in total, how many surveys were completed, and then I think we also need to put in there the details of what would comprise a statistically valid sample for the population of ours. And I think up previous where this graph shows up on page 16, I think there needs to be a little note on that that refers you back to Appendix B that talks to the statistical validity of that. So, yeah, I agree. You know, we got the opinion of 55 people. That's better than not hearing from anybody, most definitely. But then if we're going to make decisions on things, I think we must have statistically valid sample in order to assess what our community wants.
Yes, I don't disagree with that. I
Need to get it, then
I will say that it is not common to within these processes to have statistically valid surveys, mostly because of funding. To do a statistically valid survey, you're talking about $30,000. That was almost our entire budget for the plan itself.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what we try to do in the planning process is try to do, we send out digital surveys to allow residents to comment. And even those online surveys, those aren't statistically valid because unless we're really controlling who's taking those, because technically of those 55 people who took it, there could have been somebody who took it 50 times and we can't control that. I mean, I highly doubt that is the case, but that is a possibility. And so I do think you're probably right. We probably should couch it and ensure that people can take it as it is, but I don't think it necessarily is. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's invalid, that the opinions that we heard, I think there are some legitimate things that we heard in the survey from those who took it, even though, like you said, it could be misleading because it's not statistically valid. There could be maybe a higher percentage of people think the city's doing just everything that we have to, even though the survey that we took says otherwise, or it says the people who took the survey felt like the city should be doing more, even though the wider population might not have that same opinion. So I do agree. There could be some things that are not, that could be misleading on, but I think if we couch it right, and I don't necessarily think that survey would impact some of the other findings and recommendations from the plan itself either.
I think it gives you an idea of trends. I guess my
Yeah.
question is, how many times did people get to answer on this survey? Because this doesn't add up to 55.
So some of the questions, you could select multiple
Okay. that's-
options. Yeah, there's some that you're only limited to answering.
So you
one of
get to
them, but
pick
some of them
three
you
of
could
them.
pick like,
Okay.
like what of these were important to you. So you'll see that some answers have, like 100 responses, even though we only had a total of 55
Okay.
complete surveys.
But I do think, statistically valid, probably not, but to give us a general idea of trends is probably a good way to couch it.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So, well, and so then you look at the next page, page 17, and it says the majority of survey respondents, 76% were somewhat or very concerned about water use. But out of 24,000 residents, 5,500 units, 12 toilets have been replaced since 2019.
Is that just people though that have reported that?
Pardon me?
Is that just probably people that have said, I want to get this toilet rebate or whatever?
So I think these are the actual rebate numbers.
Yeah, it's like, I know we replaced ours, but I didn't,
I had no
do
clue
anything with
there was a
them.
rebate on.
yeah.
Yeah. And 53
Oh,
people got rebates for turf and 270
Sorry.
rebate for controllers. So out of, 5,500, so it doesn't, when I read that, well, it doesn't indicate a great concern, and if there's not a correlation there, maybe there isn't, and I don't know. Maybe there's not a correlation there
I just-
between concern and getting a rebate,
And people probably don't know about it. Like we replaced our toilets and we have a smart controller, but I didn't realize there was rebates. And so I think there's a lot of that.
Yeah, so not all smart controllers were eligible for the rebate,
Or
so.
me personally, I don't want to go through the process of dealing with the rebate. I just know what I need to do, but sometimes those are just more than I want to deal with.
Okay, so moving on, I talked about, here's another one, page 18. Indoor and outdoor water conservation measures combined with water conscious development patterns represent proven practices that can substantially reduce overall water demand. I'm certain that's true, but I'd kind of like to, I'm sure there's a reference that was taken from, and where can I go read more about that, what those proven practices were, and identify the proven practices and see how much they help. Like I mentioned earlier. Okay, page 19. So I'm looking at the water demand comparison, figure 4, and I'm not certain. I'm not certain what I'm even seeing here, because I'm seeing this high demand thing comparing the lots, and it's got number of raindrops or water drops, I guess, that indicate usage. But I don't know, is this normalized to something? So I'm comparing apples to apples across those lots. Because if I'm not, and I look at this thing, I say, okay, high demand, 20,000 square foot lot takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 drops. The 5,000 square foot lot takes 3 drops. So it looks like 5,000 square foot lot uses less. But there are 4 5,000 square foot lots to equal the same land mass as a 20,000 square foot lot. So if I times 4 times 3 raindrops, I get 12 raindrops. I think I did that math right. So that would indicate that the smaller lot in high demand uses more water than the bigger lot. So
So yes, if you look at it a per area basis, that would be true. Like if you have a townhome development or an apartment complex on a per acre basis, they will likely use more water than one single family home on an acre. However, if you look at a per unit or per capita use, typically the higher density units use less water on that calculation. So if you're just looking at area, you're correct. A high density development will use more water than a low density development typically. But
So therefore, if we want to conserve water, then we should be moving towards lower density development.
Yes, but that's not the only demand within the city. We also have a huge housing demand. And so I think the idea is we are trying to balance those demands. Because if we need another, let's just say we need another 5,000 units in the city, is the best way to do that from a water conservation standpoint, providing a lot of large lots, or the best policy to do that would be to provide smaller lots? And I think from a water standpoint, and land is somewhat limited, so if we could zone the whole thing so we could never get 5,000 units per se, but those units would just be built somewhere else in the county. So I think that's what this is just trying to get at, is that as we're making policy decisions about water use, that we should take density into consideration. Because if, like I said, there's demand for housing, there's a need for housing. And so what type of housing do we supply, and how does that impact water?
But at the end of the day, higher density uses more water than lower density
On a per acre basis,
per acre basis.
yes, but lower on a per unit or per capita basis typically. The state recently found they're in 2022, they produced a water guide that their study found that once you reached about 8 units an acre, that was about your peak water efficiency on a per unit and per capita basis, if I remember correctly. And I can send you that study.
So we say, okay, on a per acre basis, what I said was accurate, that lower density saves water, right? We only have so much land available in the city. So if we have lower density, we're going to have lower water usage. And so ultimately, the best way to save water is to have lower density across the city.
However, I would argue that we're not just looking at just a city. This is a regional issue, and same with housing. And so if everybody did low density across the state, then we would be much worse off water-wise.
Okay, this is our general plan, not regional general plan. So
Correct, but
we should probably stay with our city.
But if we follow that same policy across the region, it would be no different than if we did it for a single city. And we would limit the water usage by, so I'm just saying those things are conflicting and they're competing. So what seems to be water conservation may not necessarily be water conservation in the big picture.
and I would agree with that. And I'm not advocating that we just do apartments everywhere just for water's sake, because I agree that wouldn't be smart development. That would conflict with other goals that we have in the city. But I do think it is important to note that there's regional issues, and I think you're getting to the same point that I am. We're just approaching it from two different angles. Is that as we're looking at density and housing development, not only in West Haven, but what our water supply is on a regional basis, that we should take that type of land use into consideration.
But if we go to high density across the region, we're going to even compound our problem more greatly.
Well, I might disagree with that a little bit, mostly because I don't think demand is infinite for units. And so if we built out high density everywhere, it's not like everywhere would just demand high density. Eventually you would build out, of course. And so I do agree. I think there needs to be a balance in our in our land use decisions for housing and development. But I wouldn't necessarily just say that low density is the answer for water conservation. At least that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you. On page 20, when it talks about cluster development, grouping structures on the most suitable portions of a site allows the remaining land to be preserved as open space. This strategy can reduce the need for extensive irrigation and infrastructure while protecting non-irrigated land. But the green space within the city is predominantly turf, which requires water. And so I think there's a distinction that needs to be made between green space and irrigated space. And further, what we've also seen most recently is that green space that was left open as green space and higher density, more water usage in a large development, you know which one I'm talking about. And we allowed higher density, more water usage in that. And then now we want to put more housing on that green space, increasing our water demand. So I don't know that green space clustering of homes is a benefit.
Yeah, I definitely see that. Maybe we should clarify within that because I think it might depend on what that green space looks like. Because if it's manicured soccer fields, that yeah, that's obviously going to use a lot more water than what a neighborhood would that covers the same footprint. But if it's more natural space, like if you think of Privedel Park, which happened partly because of development where we don't irrigate any of that. If all that was developed as homes, that would use more water. So I think maybe we just clarify within that section that the green space of natural or agricultural type of space that is preserved is more water efficient.
Everywhere in the city where we have introduced clustering, there's turf.
Yes, and turf is part of a lot of it, but you think green farms, there are sections that are turf and sections that are more natural. And so I think maybe what we should do is if the planning commission, depending on what the planning commission wants, we can just clarify in this section what type of green space would be more water efficient. If that is a section we want to keep in the element.
Okay. I'll go through the rest of this quickly so you all don't have to take a no-dos. Let's see, page 22 down at the bottom talks about data-informed approach enables the city identify successes, address challenges. We got to have good data. We're not making data-informed approaches. I keep bringing that up, but I think that's the foundation on which this whole thing has to be built. Let's see, page 25. Figure 5, we got the population growth projection with dates on it. Figure 6, estimated units for the future. There's no date on that. Is that also 2040?
I think we purposefully left that a little bit more vague and looking at what our potential build out would look like. Because the pattern for growth is based off of what we've seen in the past. However, the type of housing and development that we allow can impact the number of units and what that population growth looks like. Because if you look at, we don't have a good, clean chart of and history of tracking the units versus population. And so figure 6 was just an estimated number of units that we could potentially have here in the future.
Okay, and then similarly on figure 7?
Yep.
I think maybe you could put estimate or something under there, or potential, or, to indicate that that's what you said, because figure 5, it looks pretty definitive.
It does say estimated though.
Hmm?
It
Yeah,
does
it does say
estimated.
estimated at the
On
top,
both of them.
top of the chart,
Ah.
6 and 7.
Up there at the top, yep. But what I was mentioning is that the date down at the bottom, I don't know what that date is, but okay. Okay, so on page 26, I already talked about that I really think we need to advocate and coordinate or accurate data collection, standardization, data analysis, et cetera, among the four, and maybe 1.4, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
Would be a good place for that. Goal 2, implementation 2.1. When it comes to development and saving water, incentives are always a part of that, but somebody pays for those incentives in some way. Whether it's taxpayers pay for it with a tax or whatever. And I had a conversation with this many years about this very thing with a planning commission chairman many years ago. And I think we need to take the approach that, in his opinion was, well, we need to horse trade to get what we want, is the exact words he used. But really, we need to write the ordinance to get what we want. And if we want a developer to use water conservation techniques for landscaping or plumbing or whatever it is, we need to write the ordinance that requires that, rather than ask everybody to give the developer money so he does do that. And I would suggest that we put in implementation 2.1, that we add verbiage that talks to revising subdivision development and landscaping ordinances to require developers to adopt water efficient practices both inside and outside the residence and throughout the development. That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. And that's actually something that we toned down from the original draft, but, or we toned down some of the incentive language from the original draft because of that. But I think you're right. We should. I agree generally with that finding, is that it's more efficient just to create the code that we want, and ensuring that all developments do it.
Do it.
Do it.
That's what you got to do.
Yeah.
You know? Implementation 2.5. It talks to recognition initiatives such as Yard of the Month. I think that should be the Water Conserver of the Month.
Not sure how you measure that, though.
Mhm.
I'm not sure how you
Me
measure
neither.
water conservation of the month with 4 different water providers and 4 different systems of measurement. So unless you have an idea,
If you look at,
I can't.
Don't you already have a Yard of the Month program? I think the idea is, hey, you've already got this recognition program, maybe tweak it or, focus on waterwise landscaping. Revamp the name.
Yard of the Month based on criteria that isn't who has the nicest trees and flower garden, and the Yard of the Month based on who's done the most xeriscaping, water-wise efficient landscaping, et cetera. So, that's a great suggestion. Thank you for that. Tweak the criteria for Yard of the Month to talk to water conserving landscaping, and I think that would great.
It is a program, right? I found it on the website.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Done by the beautification committee, right?
Jeff
Yes,
doesn't know about the program.
Beautification Committee has moved away from Yard of the Month because we never get anybody to apply. And we have done a couple of those that have had extremely nice water-wise things. It's a great idea. It's the program just honestly hasn't taken off very much, but I think putting that criteria in there would probably really help. So making it more water-wise would be a really good part of that. But Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the outreach report summary, page 5. I'm just about through, so bear with me. Opportunities for regional collaboration. I'm sorry. Limitations of will serve letters. The sentence, last sentence, these letters often do not adequately capture long-term water sufficiency, particularly in the context of evolving growth patterns and shifting conservation expectations. Okay, so if these will serve letters aren't particularly useful, what should we be doing?
What I've read is having a way to ensure adequate supply somehow as part of that will serve letter. So they have to guarantee that there's, supply, there's not just paper water, but actual water behind that.
So how would we go about doing that? With the
That's a
water
great
provider?
question.
But we had some of those when we were doing our interviews with the water providers. They were hesitant about making about guaranteeing or making their will serve letters stronger. Essentially, they liked how they currently are and weren't really super ready to provide something more substantial to the city. Partly because they don't want to overcommit with something that's too concrete. And they themselves recognize the limitation of the will serve letters, but they weren't, at least in our discussions, it didn't seem like they were proposing us to change how we did this, how we interacted with developers and with will serve letters. I think they like the system, but they, like I said, the will serve letter doesn't necessarily cover all the long-term water needs of a site or the system as a whole potentially, but
So if I understand you correctly, the concern is the will serve letter is just a present day, yep, we got you now. But what about the future? And that's what this whole water conservation thing is about the future. So I think that's something we maybe revisit with the water providers or something. Regional
Can I sneak
collaboration.
in here real quick,
I'm sorry.
Commissioner? Can I sneak in? Back to the Yard of the Month. I think it's a program that can work. It's just that, we haven't had that particular direction to make it so water wise. And I think if we focused on that more in the future, I think it would work out a lot better. The big problem has been public participation, kind of like surveys. You don't get a whole lot of people responding. So, but I think it's a great idea and it's a great program that we can work with. So I forgot to mention that. So I'm sorry. Please, Commissioner Lamar.
All right, continuing on, page 5, opportunities for regional collaboration. Again, data collection in my mind is very important, even though, however, there was general agreement that a fully regionalized system is neither necessary nor desired. I think it's necessary. We're not going to impact that, but at least get them on the same page with data collection analysis. Appendix B, we talked about that, having survey methodology incorporated into Appendix B. And with that, I'm done. Applause, please.
Okay, any other discussion from anybody out there? Anyone? All right. Well, if there's no other discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
so can I maybe just clarify what we're going to motion? Because I think George had a lot of really good comments and stuff that we will go ahead and change. I have a lot of notes from the discussion. And so I guess our recommendation would be, if my recommendation today is still to move forward with and send this to the council. However, I guess I'm just curious. I think me and Aubrey have some, or excuse me, me and Aubrey we have some good notes from our discussion, and we'll make some appropriate changes before it goes to council. But I don't know how comfortable is the planning commission with that kind of broad discretion for us to make those changes and submit them to the council, or were there any changes necessary, or were there any things that were mentioned that the commission might not want us to implement? I think that's where I just want to make sure I know how to move forward with the document after tonight's meeting.
So I think you made a lot of great remarks, and I think the biggest issue that you're having is you feel like we don't have good data, but I don't think that we can make that before the deadline. So I truly think that we should go ahead with based on the changes that we can make in here that you talked about.
Yeah, I don't think, and I'm certainly not suggesting that we don't move forward until we have the data collection and analysis done between those, because frankly, I don't think we can ever make that as a city. We can ever effectuate that between those 4 different providers.
Right.
I think we must make an effort to get them to do that, to get them on the same page. But yeah, I certainly agree. I would say you guys have put a fantastic amount of work into this. It's a very, very good document, even though I had a lot to say about it. Please don't take that as criticism. It's an extremely good, well put together, well thought out document that covers everything in the kitchen sink, pun intended. So thank you for that. I implicitly trust you, Stephen, to do the right thing for this document, and I'm fine with making a motion to approve this document and allow you to have the discretion to make the changes that are necessary before providing it to the city council.
I am the same way.
Do you want to make that in a formal motion, sir?
I thought I did.
Okay. Well,
I make a motion to approve moving forward with the water use element document for the general plan, allowing Steve the discretion to make the changes discussed and that are necessary to move forward with this document and present it to the city council.
I second that motion.
okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Item number 9.
And then, sorry, before we adjourn, we'll make some changes and we'll send a report back to the planning commission so that you know what we did. And then if there are any red flags or something that you think we caught correctly, just let me know, and we'll have a couple weeks until the next council meeting. So we'll make sure we get that taken care of and report back.
Yes. As a reminder, we don't have any more meetings in November, so we don't meet until, I think it's the 10th of December or something like that. Yeah, okay. Item number 9, adjournment. Anybody want to adjourn?
I'll motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yeah, I didn't think so. There's cupcakes next meeting, folks. So being the last meeting of the year.
Thank y'all for your patience.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you.
thank you for taking time to review.